Previously on World History and Geography.
During the Middle Ages, the average European had a very limited worldview and was concerned only with their survival, their security, and their salvation. People were too busy focusing on these three S's to explore the world around them. During the late Middle Ages, Europeans suffered from both war and the plague. Those who survived wanted to celebrate life and the human spirit. They began to question institutions of the Middle Ages, which had been unable to prevent war or to relieve suffering brought by the plague. Some Europeans began to question the Catholic Church, which taught Christians to endure suffering in life while they awaited their rewards in heaven. In northern Italy, writers and artists began to express a new spirit and to experiment with different styles and ideas. These men and women would greatly change how Europeans saw themselves and their world.
And now, our feature presentation.
This movement that started in Italy caused an explosion of creativity in art, writing, and thought, which lasted approximately from 1300 to 1600 CE. Historians call this period the Renaissance.
Renaissance, also American Renaissance.
Renaissance means rebirth, and it refers to a revival or rebirth of art and learning.
So cool! I feel like I'm back in the Renaissance.
Oh, and remember that although Renaissance is a French term,
Bonjour.
the Renaissance began in Italy.
Ciao!
The educated men and women of Italy hoped to bring back to life the culture of classical Greece and Rome. Yet in striving to revive the past, the people of the Renaissance created something new. Italy had three advantages that made it the birthplace of the Renaissance: thriving cities, a wealthy merchant class, and the classical heritage of Greece and Rome. Overseas trade, spurred by the Crusades, had led to the growth of large city-states in northern Italy. The region also had many sizable towns. This meant northern Italy was urban, while the rest of Europe was still mostly rural. Since cities are often places where people exchange ideas, cities were an ideal breeding ground for an intellectual revolution. A wealthy merchant class developed in each Italian city-state. Because city-states like Milan and Florence were relatively small, a high percentage of citizens could be intensely involved in political life. Merchants dominated politics. Unlike nobles, merchants did not inherit social rank. To succeed in business, they used their wits. As a result, many successful merchants believed they deserved power and wealth because of their individual merit. This belief in individual achievement became important during the Renaissance. Since the late 1200s, the city-state of Florence had been a republic, but during the Renaissance, Florence came under the rule of one powerful banking family, the Medici.
Medici, Italian, also British, Medici.
The Medici family bank had branch offices throughout Italy and in major cities of Europe. Cosimo de' Medici was the wealthiest European of his time. In 1434, he won control of Florence's government. He didn't seek political office for himself, but influenced members of the ruling council by giving them loans. For 30 years, he was dictator of Florence. Cosimo de' Medici died in 1464, but his family continued to control Florence. His grandson, Lorenzo de' Medici, came to power in 1469. Known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, he ruled as a dictator, yet kept up the appearance of having an elected government. Renaissance scholars looked down on the art and literature of the Middle Ages. Instead, they wanted to return to the learning of the Greeks and Romans. They achieved this in several ways. First, the artists and scholars of Italy drew inspiration from the ruins of Rome that surrounded them. Second, Western scholars studied ancient Latin manuscripts that had been preserved in monasteries. Third, Christian scholars in Constantinople fled to Rome with Greek manuscripts when the Turks conquered Constantinople in 1453. As scholars studied these manuscripts, they became more influenced by classical ideas. These ideas helped them to develop a new outlook on life and art. The study of classical texts led to humanism, an intellectual movement that focused on human potential and achievements. Instead of trying to make classical texts agree with Christian teaching, as medieval scholars had, humanists studied them to understand ancient Greek values. Humanists influenced artists and architects to carry on the old classical traditions. Humanists popularized the study of subjects common to the classical education, such as history, literature, and philosophy. These subjects are called the humanities. In the Middle Ages, some people had demonstrated their piety by wearing rough clothing and eating plain foods. However, humanists suggested that a person might enjoy life without offending God. In Renaissance Italy, the wealthy enjoyed material luxuries, good music, and fine foods. Most people remained devout Catholics. However, the basic spirit of Renaissance society was secular, worldly, and concerned with the here and now, rather than spiritual. Even church leaders became more worldly. Some lived in beautiful mansions, wore expensive clothes, and threw lavish banquets.
I went to a place to eat. It said breakfast anytime, so I ordered French toast during the Renaissance.
Church leaders during the Renaissance beautified Rome and other cities by spending huge amounts of money for art. They became patrons of the arts by financially supporting artists. Artists today tend to create art and then sell it in a gallery to make money. Back during the Renaissance, an artist needed to find a patron first to have the money and time to make the art, which were usually works that the patron wanted to see. Anyway, Renaissance merchants and wealthy families also were patrons of the arts. By having their portraits painted, okay, thank you for that, or by donating art to the city to place in public squares, the wealthy demonstrated their own importance. Renaissance writers introduced the idea that all educated people were expected to create art. In fact, the ideal individual strove to master almost every area of study. Wait, what? What is that? A man who excelled in many fields was praised as a universal man. Later, such people were referred to as Renaissance men. The Renaissance woman was an upper-class woman who also knew the classics and was charming. Yet she was not expected to seek fame, but was expected to inspire art, but rarely to create it. Renaissance writers produced works that reflected their time, but they also used techniques that writers rely on today. Some followed the example of the medieval writer Dante. Oh, the laurel wreath on his head? That's to show he was a great poet and writer. Dante wrote in the vernacular, his native language, instead of Latin. Dante's native language was Italian.
Arrivederci ignorance.
In addition, Renaissance writers wrote either for self-expression or to portray the individuality of their subjects. Francesco Petrarch, hey, he's got a wreath, was one of the earliest and most influential humanists. Some have called him the father of Renaissance humanism. He was also a great poet. The Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, he has a wreath too, is best known for the Decameron, a series of realistic, sometimes inappropriate stories. The Decameron presents both tragic and comic views of life. The Prince, by Niccolò Machiavelli, also examines the imperfect conduct of human beings. It does so by taking the form of a political guidebook. In The Prince, Machiavelli examines how a ruler can gain power and keep it in spite of his enemies. In answering this question, he began with the idea that most people are selfish, fickle, and corrupt. To succeed in such a wicked world, Machiavelli wrote, "A prince must be strong as a lion and shrewd as a fox. He might have to trick his enemies and even his own people for the good of the state." In The Prince, Machiavelli was not concerned with what was morally right, but with what was politically effective. Machiavelli pointed out that most people think it is praiseworthy in a prince to keep his word and live with integrity. Nevertheless, Machiavelli argued that in the real world of power and politics, the prince must sometimes mislead the people and lie to his opponents. As an historian and political thinker, Machiavelli suggested in order for a prince to accomplish great things, he must be crafty enough to not only overcome the suspicions, but also gain the trust of others. His writings still influence politicians and rap artists today. And I have the Machiavelli action figure. The women writers who gained fame during the Renaissance, like Vittoria Colonna, usually wrote about personal subjects, not politics. Towards the end of the 15th century, Renaissance ideas began to spread north from Italy, where northern artists and thinkers adapted Renaissance ideals in their own ways. Oh, that's right. Be sure to check out the bonus video on the art and artists of the Italian Renaissance. Now we're done.
So I ordered French toast during the Renaissance.